ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another webinar at Flow Connect channel. At this webinar, we have another topic of cybersecurity, and our speaker is Tom Hagel. Tom Hagel is a senior security researcher with Lacework Labs. He's come from a background at tracking and analysis of malicious actors, malwares, and global events with an application of the cyber domain. His past research has focused on the threats of empathic individuals and organizations across the world and primarily targeted attackers. His experience is at the Cloud Security Research Labs as Lacework, as we have talked about it. He's senior security researcher at AT&T. He's ProtectWise at Accurate and Verizon, Director of Threat Research, Senior of Threat Researcher, again at the 2015 to 2018, and so on more. There is a link of his biography and his profile at LinkedIn in the description. I'll put it on for you so you can check him out. And let's talk about a summarize at what he's saying in this webinar. In this webinar, he's going to talk about 5 topics, from the introduction of the Lacework Labs research at what they're done and what they're going to do, their goals, the threat landscape events, and that is mostly about that more net-worthy global events that they have been closely involved with, tactics, techniques, and procedures. They mostly just talk about the tactics and the procedures of their real-life projects, and mostly in the next topic they're going to talk about threat intelligence highlights, their most highlights of their work in the real-life projects, and public contributions. So this is mostly his work and their experience of his work at the Lacework Lab. So this is mostly for people who are most technical.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Lacework Cloud Threat Report 2021, Volume 1 Review. My name is Nian Lee, and I'm on the global marketing team here at Lacework, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will run approximately 35 to 40 minutes and includes a Q&A session at the end. Please submit questions at any time in the Q&A window on the top right, and we'll do our best to answer all questions. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand by the end of the day. Also, on the right hand of your screen, you'll see the resources panel. Here you can find a copy of today's presentation, the Lacework Cloud Threat Report Volume 1, as well as Lacework Lab social links where you can connect and collaborate. Now with that, I'm excited to introduce to you today's speaker, Tom Hagel, who's a senior security researcher with Lacework Labs. He comes to Lacework with a background of tracking and analysis of malicious actors, malware, and global events with an application to the cyber domain. Tom, welcome. And now I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for attending today. I'm really excited to walk through this with you. This is our inaugural threat report for the cloud. So this is a big step for us, and I hope you get as much value out of it as I have personally. So like mentioned, feel free to throw any comments or questions in the Q&A, and let's go ahead and get started. So talking about the agenda, first up, I'm going to dive into our unique research conducted in-house on the Lacework Labs team. These often resulted in some form of public content. So all the links in the specific research will be shared again in your browser here, but you can also find the links in the report itself as well. So I won't be diving extremely deep into all of these, but if anything is of particular interest, be sure to check out that link for the actual content itself. Next, we'll take a look at noteworthy global events that happened earlier this year and our findings and response assisting impacted businesses related to that event. Specifically, in this case, we'll be focusing on the Code Cove supply chain intrusion that happened in early 2021. We'll also share some insight into our most noteworthy TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures for those unaware, observed from a variety of cloud network intrusions which we've been observing as well. So that's exciting stuff. Additionally, I'll be highlighting some of our relevant threat intelligence on an adversary we've been closely monitoring and observing in the wild. Some of the kind of like a big summary of what they've been up to, and hopefully assist on any defenders attending this call. And lastly, I'm going to share some additional insight into, again, our public contributions, and again, talk quickly about how you can kind of consume more of our public threat intelligence and educational content for those that are working in the trenches as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first up, talking about our labs in-house research. In April this year, we publicly reported on our analysis of the sysrv hello botnet. This botnet emerged in roughly late 2020, making use of Golang in sample targeting both Windows and Linux, which is not super common. Overall, this is an opportunistic cryptocurrency miner, but it comes combined with a pretty interesting post-infection propagator. Initial access for this guy has been done through a variety of code execution vulnerabilities in things such as PHP Unit, Apache Solr, Confluence, JBoss, Oracle WebLogic, and quite a few others. So the list is large. As you can read in the report, we've made use of a unique SSH fingerprint to actually proactively identify roughly 26 compromised hosts acting as C2 servers. And that's actually a pretty kind of newer approach towards researching and identifying C2 servers based off of things like a publicly accessible fingerprint, in this case an SSH key, which is pretty cool stuff. Shodan reports for the IPs acting as C2s shared, or the Shodan reports for IPs sharing the SSH keys we use for those fingerprints show an even distribution of CouchDB and Mosquito and MQTT. So it's possible that these C2 servers were built by the exploitation of those services. Not confirmed though, but an interesting find through just public intelligence as well, which is cool. The botnet itself, amusingly, inbound exploit attempts included CVE identifiers as the user agent. So, something that helped our early investigations. Lots of screenshots in the blog on that, which is great to see. In the report, we actually lay out quite a few details around the infection process, persistence methods used, and defense evasion steps taken. For defenders, there's quite a few infection and post-compromise behaviors, which are great for catching this botnet and others, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So this is an easy to catch botnet. It's something that you can apply towards your cloud defense posture as well as pretty quickly. So definitely check it out. There's a lot of cool things to build off of in there. All right. For this guy here, this is one of our recent Defender education-focused blogs. For those unfamiliar, modern Linux malware binaries are being shipped with multiple embedded files. And when you add in the complexities of things like encryption, obfuscation, and the decompilation process of things like modern languages, identifying those embedded processes and extracting them out through manual static analysis and reverse engineering is often quite time consuming and pretty heavy on the resources and pretty challenging skill set wise. So that's where this technique of leveraging strace during dynamic analysis can help. The screenshot at the bottom actually shows strace attaching to a process 3337, as you can see, which shows the connection to an IP address over port 80. So this blog really dives into anyone looking to up the reverse engineering game, specifically around Linux threats, and it's a great process to implement into your daily Defender, your analyst process to figure out what's going on. A great walkthrough on this overall, so highly recommended to check that out. So let's now move on to our research related to the identification and naming of the Carbine Loader cryptojacking campaign. In April of this year, we identified a new unique script we dubbed Carbine Loader due to it creating this directory /temp/Avalon Saber during the execution process where it dumps a lot of its files. The name Avalon Saber actually amusingly comes from a carbine rifle from an airsoft brand. So that's where we came up with the Carbine Loader name, which is pretty funny. Overall, we assessed this is opportunistically targeting public-facing Nagios, Nagios Docker wizards, and the NagViz visualizer for Nagios add-ons. Targeting those for remote code execution overall is what we see. The loader itself consists of generally publicly available and widely circulated functionality to infect, gain persistence, and a couple other capabilities such as spreading laterally through trusted SSH credentials. These shared bits of code are actually used across a multitude of Linux infecting scripts, such as this Groundhog botnet I'll be talking about next, and others. We see it quite a lot. So there's a lot of interesting overlaps between a lot of these loaders. This one's not super different. It makes use of a lot of what everyone else is using. So you catch one, you can catch a lot. So a good example of that here. Carbine Loader overall isn't highly successful if you look at it from a perspective of how much crypto mining they've generated. In this case, I believe it was a few $100 by the time we caught on to it. But interestingly, our colleagues at Team Cymru have actually recently blogged from their telemetry based on our research, talking about their perspective into global victimology and presenting a potentially less opportunistic and more targeted campaign hypothesis based on the categories of organizations that get hit with this. So really cool stuff there. Highly recommend you check that out. So for any attendees making use of Nagios solutions in their cloud environments, which is surprisingly common, we think you would benefit a lot from reading this research. I think there's a lot more to the story, talking about targeted versus opportunistic and whatnot, but we'll continue to report on this when the time is right, for sure. Okay, let's now dive into our research on the Groundhog botnet. For anyone unfamiliar, The Groundhog botnet has been kind of floating around since about 2015, primarily spreading through really basic stuff like SSH brute forcing and being used in good old denial of service attacks. The botnet was rapidly expanding by a few hundred new infections daily at the time of our report earlier this year, and infecting, again at the time of this report, about 26,000 hosts overall. More recently, the team double-checked metrics for this talk, and we're a little bit over 70,000 hosts totally infected at this point, which is pretty wild to see. The majority of the infections were found within Brazil, US, and India primarily, and of course include the clusters of the primary cloud infrastructure suppliers from or providers from Amazon, GCP, and Azure, to name a few. The Groundhog botnet itself is built on two closely related malware variants. The first is Zordos and then Groundhog. The blog summarizes the Zordos malware component and provides detail on the botnet and infrastructure, but there's a lot more to the story, so a lot more depth to this botnet overall. So it's a great thing to dive into if you're interested. During our research, we actually sinkholed a small portion of the botnet C2 domains, which is how we're able to get access to this telemetry. It's not guessing. We're actually seeing the victims come beaconing in. It wasn't a disruption effort on our end, purely for research purposes to gain an understanding and true perspective of the threat. So pretty great stuff we see here. But as again, the botnet is expanding. It's growing quite a lot. So it's a threat to take heavy consideration into, especially for the cloud-focused environments. All right, moving on. So next we have, this is another piece of content focused on, again, Defender education. So hopefully those attending here can really benefit from. It happens to be in the form of a nice short video for easier consumption. So it's really easy to get the most out of really nicely. The content is centered around Linux shared object files and how exactly attackers benefit from using the LD preload path set variable, or LD preload path, to essentially sideload malicious library files. For those unfamiliar with Linux and have a better understanding of Windows, this is really similar to things like DLL sideloading techniques. So it's very good to know from a Defender perspective. Attackers, we're observing, are making use of this technique for a variety of reasons, but primarily it's focused around ultimately a defense evasion or achieving persistence step within the infection process. Similar to our previous educational content I mentioned above, this is, again, a great Defender focused video that you should be of use to anyone that, again, takes a look at Linux samples on the daily and has to have defense considerations for Linux as well, especially in the cloud. So give it a check it out, and love to know your feedback. This is a new approach we're taking, so if you have any feedback or would like to see more of that type of content, definitely give us a shout. All right. Okay, so that's that. So let's now jump into something a bit different. For our first volume of this cloud threat report, it was surprisingly difficult to pick a single global event to discuss. It's been a crazy year, but the purpose of this is to simply share our insight, potentially a little bit of understanding of our process, and any sort of analytical assessments on a large-scale event that has impacted the industry overall, and not just something isolated to our own telemetry or our own perspective on things. So yeah, as I mentioned, of course, it's been a weird year with lots of us to learn from, but in this case, I'm going to focus on supply chain attacks, specifically the Code Cove bash uploader incident. So for those unfamiliar, in early 2021, an attacker gained unauthorized access to Code Cove suite of tools, who ended up modifying their bash uploader tool. That tool is used by many organizations in pretty continuous integration and DevOps heavy environments. CodeCove reportedly has about 29,000 customers, so the chances of encountering this was pretty high for us, so it caught our eyes, as many supply chain incidents do. So we dove in and took a look at it. So upon learning of this intrusion, our team began diving into our telemetry for any impacted customers. Now, as some of you may recall, the IOCs of this intrusion were not publicly shared for some time after the announcement. While we don't necessarily agree with that decision, it was not an excuse for us to kind of sit back and wait at the risk of the unknown impact to the networks that we help protect through our product line and our customers themselves. So we began leveraging any sort of in-house primary source intelligence, open source intelligence, and relationships throughout the industry to track them down. Eventually, we got our hands on a variety of malicious IPs, and the IPs were kind of two parts. So the first, you can kind of see in the screenshot on the right, that's actually the bash uploader script that was modified, and the attacker IP in white there, that's where they would simply insert their IP address. So we got a variety of those, and then we got our hands on the ones that were used during the actual intrusion on the CodeCove incident itself. Using this intelligence, we were able to retroactively identify any sort of impacted organizations and confirm our detection capabilities, which was great. So in various cases, we were able to confirm initial intrusion scope incurred through this, and theft of credentials through that environment variable was exfiltrated thanks to those IOCs. And this is a very interesting case with no clear signs of attribution or publicly discussed second stage efforts of this activity. An example of that would be something like a binary being, an environment variable being exfiltrated, and then a malware sample second stage binary being returned, or those credentials being used for initial access elsewhere. So at this point, we can't quite say who it was. The evidence leads to a potentially well-resourced adversary who is willing to attack the many for the sake of combing out the very few who are of true interest to them. Historically, this would, lean to nation-backed adversary groups, to name a few, or to avoid naming a few. I'll cluster it as that. As many high-profile intrusions, the security community, as with many high-profile intrusions, the security community did a great job circulating and sharing their perspectives on this incident. So big thanks to our colleagues across the industry for their collaboration. Supply chain intrusions like this are quickly becoming the norm, and the case is very similar to SolarWinds overall. It represents the value defenders can place on proper security telemetry for detecting the unknown, but also supporting critical investigations after the fact. So lots of great stuff there. Okay. Let's now talk about TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. At Lacework, we make use of MITRE ATT&CK for our technique tracking and categorization. So be sure to check out it's attack.mitre.org. If this is new to you, there's a lot of great value in implementing that within your program. These three selections I'm going to talk about are not unheard of. And honestly, they act as kind of major keystone techniques, in my opinion, to many cloud intrusions. So let's go ahead and dive in. Number one, we have T1078, valid cloud accounts. This one is a major fundamental technique, again, used in a large majority of the automated cloud intrusions that we see. Check out our previous research, again, on Carbine Loader and SysRV Hello for some examples of this. They make use of this technique heavily. The quick summary of this technique is that basically the attackers seek out and abuse valid cloud credentials to conduct their attack. For example, the post-compromise actions of those Linux loaders I mentioned, we're seeing targeting cloud applications will make use of the valid SSH keys on an infected host to then use those and spread laterally throughout the network from a single infected host. This works extremely well. It's very common to see, and that technique is one of the primaries that they use for heavy cryptojacking campaigns. So pretty successful technique. Number two, excuse me, we have T1069, permission groups discovery. This is a technique that is indeed often used in very opportunistic automated attacks. However, we have seen it in multiple intrusions in which an attacker has more hands-on keyboard and with targeted attacker-like objectives. For example, on AWS, we can look for and often detect on users compromised by the rarity of which those users query things like IAM service to check permissions. Things such as list users, list policies, and get account authorization details. So monitor for and detect on those. We've had great success on it, and you may land on some interesting stuff to investigate, to say the least. And lastly, we have number three, which is T1580, cloud infrastructure discovery. This is, again, a technique observed in various types of intrusions. Example of this would be when an attacker compromised an AWS account and abused S3 service to call things like list buckets, or on EC2, they call described instances. Overall, this is a common technique to see actors use with the objective of ultimately deploying cryptocurrency miners. However, we have seen this be leveraged in targeted intrusions to spreading laterally, in a similar way that a cryptojacker would try and get their miner on any host that they can talk to. So consider this technique heavily in your defense posture for your network for sure. And that really kind of wraps up our noteworthy TTPs of this report. And it's easy to overlook these techniques because they're honestly not the most interesting, but they should be a part of any foundation to cloud monitoring. They are often used as tripwires to kicking off a major hunting effort or intrusion investigation. So they might seem very basic, but they are, kind of, again, the keystone attack techniques that can really lead you to a lot of returned value when you monitor those. All right. Let's next dive into our threat intelligence highlight for this report. The purpose of this section is to really share an overview of a threat actor that we track closely and believe our readers of the report and you attendees here can use to best get value of to supplement your defense posture for cloud environments. So now we have our Team TNT. A quick highlight. So this is an opportunistic crimeware actor that we keep a very close eye on. We've reported on their activity a few times in specific cases for unique campaigns that they've conducted. So check out our blog for those. But this is hopefully going to give you an idea of their toolkit, what they target, some of their overall techniques commonly observed. Overall, the actor tends to aim for cryptojacking and botnet creation through various campaigns. The egocentric nature of their actions come to light when you inspect a lot of their infrastructure and social media presence, as they often claim to be legitimate pen testing and research organizations. Targets we've observed have no regard for location, simply accessibility through vulnerable services, very opportunistic in nature, such as misconfigured Kubernetes or Docker systems. This group or individual has deployed a variety of unique cloud-specific toolkits, which really catch our eyes. For example, they've made use of a custom AWS credential stealer worm, first reported earlier this year by Cato Security. This worm essentially exfiltrates AWS credentials stored in .aws/credentials and the config in .aws/config within the AWS command line interface. They ultimately succeed in sending them, when they ultimately succeed in sending them outbound to the C2 attacker server, they just collect a lot of that stuff. No known abuse or use of those credentials have been observed quite yet. So the opportunity is extremely ripe here for far more business damage than just simply botnet creation and cryptojacking. Those are okay, but when you talk about the potential for for sale access to organizations and things like that, there's a lot of opportunity here that could really damage your business. I will say one piece of research from our team, which we will be discussing in the volume 2 of this Cloud Threat Report, discusses our effort of disrupting a Team TNT campaign in which they staged a malicious Docker Hub image on a compromised Docker Hub account. This acted as an initial access method for the group to a multitude of networks using a seemingly trusted Docker image, which is pretty wild. So check out our blog for more on that if you're interested. Nonetheless, Team TNT, very credible threat to cloud environments. They're quickly iterating the ego-driven approach, the vast targeting list and toolkit that's constantly growing. We think they should receive some time to understand and be monitored for within your cloud environments. Very, very credible threat for sure. Okay, moving forward. Let's now take a quick look at our last topic for the day, which is our public contributions. Really short and quick. So recently, Lacework Labs has become much more active on social media as we continue to grow. So for keeping up with our research, like I've mentioned here, we highly recommend following us on Twitter. We like to do an analyst-to-analyst approach here. We'd like to be right within the community, so not a lot of FUD or anything like that. We'd love to collaborate directly with our community. So give us a follow there and for our threat intelligence, and we'll communicate any sort of new blogs and Defender-focused content as well. You can also see us active on LinkedIn, YouTube, and of course GitHub. If you're interested in consuming our IOCs from our blogs in an automated way or collecting our tools that we create for our blogs for various purposes, you can check out our GitHub. We put that all there. And lastly, I'm extremely proud of the fact that we are now listed as contributors to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So as you can tell from this talk, as a team and as a product and company overall, we benefit a lot from making use of MITRE ATT&CK. So with that, we're now contributing our intelligence and our insights on threats, specifically cloud-focused stuff, back in an effort to kind of help the greater community, not just our customers. So for those already familiar, be sure to check out ATT&CK. Again, like I mentioned, it's great resources there. And if you have any questions or feedback on our contributions, definitely love to hear that. We're looking to help the community as much as we can. And that's that. Great.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Now we'd like to open this up to Q&A. So if you do have a question, please type it into the Q&A box to your right. And we do have a few questions that are coming in. So I'm just going to go through them in random order. Okay. What are the primary infection methods for these threats that you mentioned?
Yeah, great question. It really overall depends on which threat you take a look at. Overall, the most common infection vector is unsecured accounts or services. Opportunistic attackers can be quick to compromise a network with something simple as a misconfigured cloud service or like Docker or, like I mentioned, Kubernetes. And often those services are not typically known to be insecure by an organization. It's something that's deployed insecure and kind of gone from there. So those are the kind of the initial vectors. You look at the more the advanced stuff. It can vary greatly, but I think the best bang for your buck is to focus on, for intrusion vectors wise, is the basics. Make sure everything's properly secured, things follow the best practices, and you have the monitoring capabilities to detect pre and post compromise actions on that front.
Right. Here's another question. Are ATPs targeting cloud networks as much, or is it primarily crimeware?
Yeah, great question again. In terms of quantities, crimeware actors are definitely winning, similar to the enterprise network. However, APTs or targeted attackers do indeed focus more on cloud, or do indeed focus on cloud environments in cases. Truly sophisticated attackers will make use of any technology to achieve their overall mission. So, be it enterprise networks, cloud services, cloud apps, or even crazy stuff like satellite technology, like satellite turtle back in the day. So it varies greatly, but as for cloud-focused APTs, I definitely recommend checking out the report from, I believe it's Sophos, talking about Cloud Snooper. Very interesting and novel attack techniques from a well-resourced, in my opinion, APT that has very cloud-heavy capabilities, where they used a lot of interesting techniques to communicate through a seemingly secured cloud network for command and control and remote access. So pretty advanced stuff there. So yeah, primarily crimeware, but APTs are kind of taking the win, or taking the chances as it will. But yeah, great question.
Okay, we've got a few more. So, is there anything the cloud platform providers, Microsoft, GCP, AWS, can do or are doing to prevent these attacks?
Yeah, it's a complicated question because like any service provider, there is an endless flood of threats. So they will take their teams and perform actions to defend their own solutions in many ways. Microsoft's doing a great job at conducting a lot of in-house research and taking very strong approaches towards disrupting stuff. In terms of increasing their product security, there's definitely a lot. However, when cloud environments provide the capability for organizations to create things in this cloud environment, their hands are almost off in many cases where they're relying on the user to secure their environment. You can't rely on the provider of the cloud environment to completely secure your solution, because a lot of it's so unique to your instance and your use case of the product, and it changes so fast. So a lot of that kind of comes down to the users themselves. But yeah, kudos to a lot of the cloud providers. They take a lot of great steps. Microsoft is a big one. I'm sure Amazon does stuff as well. But it's definitely not enough for you to rely on as a user. You definitely need supplemental solutions, be it cloud monitoring and detection capabilities, or your own defender team to supplement that.
Okay, we take a few more questions. Do you see any cloud-focused ransomware?
Great question. Ransomware is a huge topic right now. Well, there have not been any major ransomware families that are like specifically targeting cloud. It really depends on how much cloud is integrated within your organization. For example, an enterprise network intrusion, which makes use of ransomware, could spread to a cloud data or service if they're accessible within that network. It kind of ultimately depends on how that ransomware spreads. Right now, though, a ransomware attack targeting cloud service and spread there has not really been observed. I think it's likely to become a target of interest as enterprise ransomware defenses become more robust. The opportunity is really strong right now for attackers to target enterprise environments with ransomware, just because it works and it's easy and it's cheap. As soon as that goes away, they'll move on to something else, be it cloud, be it mobile, be it whatever. Who knows at that point? The adversary will find a way. So the right thing is to just kind of be ready before it gets to that point. So great question, though.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a few more questions. I think we're running up against our time. Here's another question. How can cloud CLIs be better protected from a developer's PC?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, there's not just like a single answer. I think it's from a developer's PC, it kind of comes down to first securing that developer's PC. Is that machine trusted and is it secured itself? And then stepping into the accessibility of that developer. Are their credentials as secure as possible? Are there permissions as locked down as possible? Kind of running into least privilege model, the basics there. So it's really multifaceted points there. You have to secure at every level, secure the network that developer's on. You have to secure that developer's machine. You have to secure that developer's account, and then from the cloud perspective, then you look at the capabilities of that developer's account, and then you can step even deeper into a lot of the development process. Is what they're submitting being audited? Is it being checked? Is it going through the typical CI/CD process in your DevOps environment? So there's quite a lot there. I know it's not a very straight answer, and I'm sorry, but yeah, that's kind of how I would think about it.
Okay, there's one more question. Can Lacework map the threats against the MITRE ATT&CK framework?
Yeah, right now I can get you more information on that after this conference or after this talk. Right now, that's a big effort internally, and there's lots of developing changes in the product itself. Internally, I make quite a lot of use of MITRE within our labs research team. So we do make use of it in terms of targeting or lining up specific capabilities of a threat, as I've mentioned across a lot of those techniques in the talk. In the product itself, there's different ways of getting that. So I will have to get back to you on that. If you want to submit your email, we can definitely get you a more direct answer on that for sure.
Yeah, we have the person's email, so we'll follow up after this webinar for sure.
Perfect. That'll be better than my long-winded answer.
No worries. I think we are wrapping up with our time, and we'd like to, if we didn't get to your question, we will follow up after this webinar with an email. So thank you everybody for attending on behalf of Tom and myself and Lacework. Thank you, and we hope to see you at a future webinar.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. I hope you found value out of it, and yeah, we'll see you next time.